And I think today we want to not only analyze the HUD, not only analyze the other player, but we actually want to like understand the HUD basically. So actually, the play we play here today isn't the most important. What's the most important will actually be just understanding the HUD, making sure we understand it, and so it's best to have a big sample against the guy. We don't have such a big sample against this guy, to be honest. Oh, did you give me
Mm, I,
control?
yeah, I gave you. Yeah.
Alright, so I think it's gonna be best if we find someone against who you played a lot against,
Okay.
actually. So we'll just do a all player report.
Yeah, maybe you should choose. I'll choose the 60s. Okay.
Okay, sure,
Or
sure. Yeah, we
yeah,
could pick a.
because I even have sevens and 15s here.
Okay. So gunpowder is your most common. Grizz, poker KGD. So pick one of the top four people.
Yeah, choose poker.
Poker KGD. Okay.
Yeah.
He plays some hundreds as well. So now we need to create a hand report. Okay.
Should we? Should
No,
I
three
choose only
way.
three?
I mean, heads up,
Uh,
heads up. Cool. Thanks. Okay. So, let's wait for the HUD a bit. Yeah. Okay, that's a bit better. Alright, so basically, actually, it's still like not the biggest sample. Why is the sample like not so big? Is it
Actually, I was just able to find a guy who I have like 1K hands on, and it works quite okay. So if you need another
It's
guy,
probably because of this. You have to remember just to switch that back, basically.
yeah. Okay. It freezed a little. It froze.
Yeah, okay, so we might have to wait a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just stay with this, and we'll just stay with the dorm because everything's working. And let's
Yes.
see.
I think it works now.
Yeah, there we go.
No, this one is gunpowder. Yeah.
Oh,
We can check him out if you'd like. Either one is fine.
what happened to
Mm,
poker?
yeah, the HUD disappeared. Just 1 second, Lyle.
Okay,
I don't know what is happening. I even created a ticket for uh, support because I just have a lot of info on players and I don't seem to have stats on them.
yeah.
But if not, maybe we can just study gunpowder because I have a lot of hands with him.
Yeah, that's true. It's not like we're even studying a specific player today, to be
Ah,
honest.
okay.
We're
Mm,
just learning how to use the HUD. Okay, yeah, let's just look at Gunpowder's HUD because he's the one who you have the most info against.
okay.
So, um, let's start with his heads up small blind, basically. What do you think is a about his min raise statistics? Or about his VPIP first, overall?
Yeah, I think he's granting me a little bit of respect because he's cutting 10% of his head.
Hmm.
He's obviously splitting his range. His mean raise is just a little bit higher than usual because I'm also watching the charts and I saw that regulars tend to have like 30% here. Uh,
Just for your info, GTO's min raising over 50% at 20 big blinds plus. So it's really not too high. It's quite okay, basically.
yeah, okay, so
Maybe at
uh,
13 to
as,
16 it might be a bit high.
yeah,
Yeah.
and as his stack becomes shallower, he's starting to. So I think he has a pretty similar strategy to ours, right?
Hmm. And what do you think about his min raise range? Does it look strong or weak or merged or polarized?
It looks. He obviously has his top range in his min raise range because he called my shots when I three bet his over his min raise,
Yeah.
and he also has a little bit of his top range in limp.
Yeah. Like, what would you consider a high fold versus 3-bet shove?
Anything above like 55, 60,
No, that's not so high. Like 80 plus is high.
80. Okay.
Yeah. And what would be low?
This one is low.
Well, yeah, this is definitely low. Like anything less than 60 could be considered
Yeah.
low, basically. So anything between 60 to 80 is kind of normal-ish, and against like something normalish, we definitely should follow charts mostly, kind of, or something. We shouldn't be 3-bet bluffing too much, basically. Against someone who's got less than 60, fold versus 3-bet shove, we should even cut our 3-betting range some amounts, like especially at deeper stacks like jam, less weak ace X's, jam less of the suited ace X's especially, and just be more careful with the 3-bet shoving range. So he's definitely got a very strong min-raising range, and you want to make sure uh, not to 3-bet too light against him. It's obviously also important to check Herrick notes sometimes, because, for example, it's possible that he might just be min-raising, but then he just calls with very weak hands. So let's see, okay, he's min-raising ace-king, ace-2 suited, king-6, jack-8, so he's got a few weak hands, but overall he's definitely got all his top range there. And let's see his min-raise calling range. He's called queen jack off at 13 to 16, so that might be a bit wide, but it's not like terrible, and everything else is pretty standard. He's min-raising again. He's got like 2 weak hands here, but most of the time it's strong. So as we see, overall his min-raise range is generally just super strong, and these weak hands that he's min-raising are very normal, and there's nothing wrong with min-raising those, basically. Let's look at his limping range as well. So he limped ace queen at 13 to 16. He limped king 9, king 10, ace 5. So as we see, his limping range, it only starts to have top range below 16 big blinds. And even then, like, it's not much. It's just ace queen. Like, there's still a lot of weak hands, like, in his limping range overall. So definitely, Herrick notes also show that his min raising range is much stronger than his limping range. Okay, and we can also just see it in this. Like, his limp raise is 2 out of 6, 2 out of 13 overall, so it's nothing too special. But again, it happened at below 20 big blinds. Like, probably we'll see almost zero min raise above 20 big blinds against this guy, I think. Limp raise. Alright. So what do you think about his limp fold percentage? Is it high or
I think
low?
pretty normal.
Yeah.
Pretty standard. Yeah.
It's quite normal. And another crucial thing about our HUD is actually we need to they simplify it a lot simply by the colors. Because if a color is in white, then generally it means it's kind of normal and it's going to be harder to exploit it. But if a color is, for example, red, it means it's generally on the more aggressive or sticky side. And if a color is in, for example, green, it means it's generally in the more passive or nitty side. So while you're playing, you can even just kind of look at the color and very quickly get a general overview. And here we could say overall he looks quite balanced pre-flop, but post-flop he might be a little bit over-aggressive on the small blind. Post-flop, maybe just a few small leaks, but nothing too huge. And post-flop on the heads-up big blind, he might be slightly too nitty, especially in limp pots, because everything here is green, as you see. Whereas over here, most things are green, but he's not folding to c-bets too much. But apart from that, we probably don't have the biggest sample. Probably you're not min-raising too much, yeah. And so probably even against this guy who you played a lot, you see we don't have the biggest sample. So just from seeing the colors, we can immediately make some pretty big assumptions already. Alright, so basically his limp fold versus ISO shove, it's 80. Do you think it's high or low?
Still pretty standard. It's pretty high actually, but I think the standard is 80 or something like that, 80, 85, right?
Yeah. Like basically limp fold to ISO shove, 85 plus would be what we can consider high, above 16 big blinds. So 80 is just on the borderline of high. And low would be anything less than 75. So 80 is kind of okay, as we see. However, again, we can see some very big tendencies that his play switches quite a lot. Like at 16 plus so far, it's 100. Like we probably haven't ISO shoved enough. So maybe that's something you could try more. Or maybe it's just because are you doing any ISOs with 1/3 of your stack to do
No, no. I'm just studying it. I also tried the smaller donking size bet size as you advised us. I also saw that at a player today, and I still need to rewatch the videos you made like 2 or 3 more times to fully get it.
Alright, so just for your info, if we ISO non-all in any size, even if it's 1/3 of our stack, it's going to count as an ISO non-all in. So maybe that could explain why your ISO shove is so low, but definitely 4% is extremely low.
Way too lower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 16 big blinds plus, I would be ISO shoving a ton against him basically, like every off-suited ace. That you don't want to ISO 1/3 stack, such as ace jack plus, let's say. You could also ISO shove a lot of the suited connectors, 6-5 suited, 6-7, 7-8, even 8-9, and maybe even one gappers, 4-5 suited as well, like 8-6 suited, 7-5 suited, etc. Maybe you can open up Equilab to
Okay.
yeah, can you just open Equilab? Thank you.
Okay. You
yeah.
have it?
Yeah, yeah. And for example, like that kinda, yeah, you could even honestly add more and basically ISO shove these, and I don't know, like you could ISO shove ace X's if you want, but I'd probably just check or ISO non all in with them. And definitely you can also, for example, ISO some of these, and you can ISO some of these. Now, against this guy, you could basically do it all the time with all of these hands, because it's probably hard to believe that he's going to defend his range properly against it, since he's limp folding a lot, like above 16 big blinds, basically. Less than that, you can start being a bit more careful because he's cutting his range a bit, and he starts to put more of his range into, like top range into the limps. So above 16 big blinds, all his top range is in the min raise. So that's why you can ISO shove a ton above 16 big blinds versus him.
Yep. Nice.
And his limp fold, his limp raise is pretty standard, so you shouldn't like try to attack his non-all in his fold versus non-all in too much, basically. And against the min raise, you can even fold a little bit more because his min raising range is just super strong in general. Like you can, if you see the smart spin charts against regs, that would probably be okay, I think. Yeah, I think the charts against regs will be okay when you talk about the calling range, because like as we see, it's folding some jack 6, some 9-6, some queen 4. Like those are hands that generally I wouldn't be folding, but against this guy, I mean against regs, but against this guy I'd be folding them. So I think charts against regs are generally a bit nitty, but against this guy it makes total sense. Let's look at the post-flop. What can we say about post-flop?
Yeah, I mean raise spots I think it's still pretty standard. Only thing is that his c-bet on the turn is very high, and he's delaying a lot.
Yeah, like what would you consider a high c-bet number?
On the flop,
Yeah,
yeah, I think close to 70 is pretty standard, and I don't know 75, 80 or higher.
exactly, yeah. 75 or higher can basically be considered high. 50 and lower can be considered low. Anything between 50 to 75 is kind of in the medium range. I'd say even 70 plus now, like, and yeah, something between 50 to 70 should be good. So his c-bet seems okay, but there's definitely some things that are standing out. He's, for example, what's his second barrel? It's extremely high, 3 out of 3, 10 out of 13. So definitely his barrel is very, very high. Um, it's what would you consider high and low for second barrel in general?
Mm, anything
Oh,
between like 40 and 60, I think is normal. Anything higher than 60 would be on the more aggressive side.
Exactly, yeah. Like especially for the population. Population is barreling like I don't know, 40% or less, and GTO is probably barreling like 55% around, and so I'd say anything above 60 is high. So he's barreling 77 and 100, like that's actually huge, basically. So it means something. It means he's probably got a lot of his top range in his c-bet, and he's not protecting his checkback range. And how can we check if that's true? Somebody?
so, well, his fault to check raise is also quite low, I would say. It's 25 in raise,
Mm-hmm.
33 games. So
Exactly.
it means that if he bets, he usually has a strong range because he's not folding.
Yeah, so fold versus check raise is very low. Well, or quite low at least. And again, these colors light up in colors. Um, like fold versus check raise, we could consider it high if it's over 45%, or even above 50%. And if it's below 30 or below 35, we can start to consider it rather low. And let me just check quickly what GTO fold versus check raise is. It's 46 in min raise pots, and in limped pots, GTO fold versus check raise. Oh no, that's in limp pots. So fold versus check raise in limp pots is 46. In min raise pots, it's 58. So as you see, he's calling way too much. And again, it indicates that even though his c-betting range is mediocre, probably he's just putting way too much of his top range in there. He's probably got a very merged, strong top range in there. Betting probably all draws, or most draws, all top pairs, and probably even most of his bottom and mid pairs. And another way to confirm this is by looking at his fold versus probe. So his fold versus probe is like 67 here and 44 here. However, you only barreled once, so that probably doesn't matter at all. And here he's folded 2 out of 2. So like basically, you shouldn't try to attack his c-bets. You should basically just attack his checks, because when he checks, you probe and barrel all the time. You should probe and barrel almost every time you have
It's
any.
not better to check and raise his delay as it's super high.
Or maybe with value, but if you've got total air, like, you don't want to raise his delay. Maybe if you have a draw, you can raise his delay with some draws, because you have some equity. But with, like, total air, you don't want to do that, because you have no equity, and it's better to just probe and barrel, basically. So, what would you consider a high fold versus probe?
Anything above 40?
Anything above 50, we could say.
Okay.
And anything below 30, we could say is low. So something between 30 to 50 is kind of normal, like over here, or closer to balanced, let's say. So here in limp pots it looks a bit more medium, but definitely he's not protecting it enough still because he's just still folding way too much on rivers. And that's why it makes a lot of sense with air hands to go and probe and barrel because you'll fold him out so much. Whereas against with your value hands, he's actually going to bluff. He's going to delay and barrel a lot. So if he's going to delay and barrel a lot, you can just either call twice. Especially make sure with like mid pair, second, even weak pair, you can just check call twice with those hands. Because he's probably just got way too much air in that range. Okay, let's not worry too much about ISO pots, but nothing special regarding his stats. Yeah, I think we analyzed his small blind pretty well. Let's go and switch to his big blind. So, alright. Firstly, we need to talk about the donk bet. Let's not. Okay. Actually, yeah, let's talk about pre-flop. So, what would you say is high and low fold versus min raise?
High, I think it's anything higher than 30, right? And medium should be something between 20 and 30.
Yeah, definitely. Like GTO is around 23% or something, and I'd say over 30 is definitely already quite high. And anything less than 20 starts to get quite low. Even anything above 27 can be kind of on the slightly higher side. And what do you think about his 3-betting range?
Yeah, I think it's pretty standard. Maybe his 3-bet shoving range is on the lower side.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's pretty standard.
I'd say it's
It's
definitely more on the lower side than not.
Yeah. There should be something close to 20, right? The 3-bet shoving range.
Yeah.
Because I know that all the pairs and all the aces are close to 20.
And
I
probably
think-
again we can check Herrick notes here, and we can just see like heads up big blind, 3-bet all in again, just super standard. Like we haven't caught him bluffing once basically, so he's reacting very passively to us. He's not over 3-betting or anything. So definitely it could be worth it to min raise more. Alright, but first let's also talk about his ISOs. So, what do you think about his overall ISO?
I
How
think
much is it?
It's pretty low, right? Because the ISO should be something close to 20.
Yeah,
And his ISO shove, I think something close to 20 should be, again, something pretty medium, standard.
exactly. Yeah, again, like the numbers say everything. However, it's more like actually it's kind of balanced overall. It's just he's not ISO shoving until he gets below 20 big blinds. He chooses just to ISO non all in basically. And then the shallower he gets, the more he starts ISO shoving, which is kind of standard. But definitely at each stack depth, again, it's too low. It's 30 overall, but it's only like a bit too low compared to GTO. GTO is ISOing how much? Did you remember from the video I made for you?
45, 40, 45, something close to that.
No. GTO is ISOing above 20 big blinds, 37%. And then at
In
6...
total.
In total, yeah. 37% in total. At 16 to 20, around 40. At 13 to 16, around 45. At 10 to 30, at like, and let's say at 8 to 12, more like around 50. So, as we see, this guy at every single stack depth until below 10 big blinds, he's ISOing way too nettle. way too little. And that means we should widen our VPIP against him, which is good. I see you doing that. And basically, you can min raise more because he's not 3-betting. You can limp more of your bottom range for sure. Like maybe just cut bottom, 3-5% is perfect. And just limp c-bet with the bottom range. And with the top range, you can generally min raise. It's a pretty easy game plan against this big blind. He hasn't folded much in min raise pots, and that's exactly why you can go ahead and min raise more of your top range. Because in limp pots he's just very foldy everywhere, but in limp pots he's a bit more sticky, he's got more hands to continue with. And that's why with your strongest hands it's probably a good idea to min raise them more often than not. Even if you don't want to call against a 3-bet, like even with like let's say mediocre offsuit hands, so even with like these type of hands that you might not necessarily want to min raise fold, you can still min raise them a lot because they're still rather strong. He's still going to call with worse quite often. And these are hands people usually tend to be limping, but they do basically very well as min raisers, especially if the guy's not 3-betting enough. Yeah. Okay.
Against this guy, should I min raise more? And considering his post flop stats, should I just min raise and then just delay and not see bet with those?
Not really, because he's not check raising enough either. Like if his check raise was super high, you could do that, but if he's just calling and he's never check raising, it's still fine to c-bet because you can basically c-bet and realize your equity. And he's still going to fold sometimes. And you can go for the bet check bet, which he's also folding to. He's probed 100, but he's not probing here, so basically he's probably on the more honest side. So there's no need to like start checking back way too much if he's slightly calling too much, as long as he's not check raising. The most important factor to make us want to c-bet less is actually how much they raise against us, because then we cannot realize equity. So yeah, his fold versus c-bet here is rather low, although it could still be variance at this point. And alright, let's talk about donk bets. This guy's never donking, that's fine, but let's just talk about it in theory against, what would you consider a low donk bet percentage on the flop?
Under 10?
I think under 5 it's low, right?
Yeah, less than 5. If someone is donking less than 5%, we could consider it low, and then you don't really want to do much against it. And what would you consider a high donk bet?
10 plus probably.
Probably 15 plus. Yeah. And anything above above 10 to 15 you could start considering more high, and it means you want to figure out what they put in the donk betting range. We had a coaching on that in the first part of Top Dogs, so if you're not sure about how to play against donk bets, make sure to check that out again. And yeah, this guy's not donking, so we don't have to worry about it much. And what about check raise? What would you consider medium, high, low?
Something between 15 and 20, I think is medium, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anything higher than 20 should be high.
Okay, so actually a high check raise would be, even anything above like 15, yeah. But like even depending on like even above 10 can be considered slightly more high. And anything below 10 is pretty low. So 10 to 15 is kind of medium, as you said. Let's try to see. Let me check big blind GTO. What it's check raising. I'm not sure. Raise vs c-bet 19. Raise vs c-bet 22. So in limp pots, GTO's check raising 19%. Oh no, sorry, that was at shallow stacks. Alright, so it's actually check raising 15% overall, but at 20 to 25 it's like 11. At 15 to 20 it's like 13. This is in limp pots. Interesting. So yeah, somewhere between 10 to 15 is kind of normalish. And in min raise pots, it's actually check raising more. At 15 to 20 big blinds, it's check raising 18% and 15%. So slightly more. And the overall would be around 17. So we can even say 15 to 20 would be kind of normal for GTO. So you see GTO's check raising more in general, and that's why against the population we can see bet more, because they don't check raise enough. That's the biggest factor to not be c-betting. It's if they check raise or not how much they fold actually. Of course, if they don't fold much, the difference between betting and checking will actually be small with your air hands. So you can check if they are very exploitable on turns, especially, such as this guy, because he's folding to delays way too much, he's not probing enough, and because of that, definitely you can move most of your air range into the delay range in min-raise pots, because we found something that's extremely exploitable. Alright. What would you consider a low and high probe, first of all?
Something higher than 45.
How much?
I think 40 is standard, right?
40. Okay. Like you tell me and I'll tell you what is correct after, like what you think. So 40 is standard. What is low and high?
Sure, high should be something higher than 45, 50. And lower anything like close to 30.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Like basically a low probe we could consider anything less than 30. Or yeah, basically less than 30. How much is GTO probing?
I have absolutely no idea.
Around 35% overall. And a high probe could be considered like around 50 plus basically, and definitely against someone who's probing 50 plus we want to be defending our check back range on flops way more to have more hands to call with. And what could be considered a high and low fold versus delay?
I think something standard is 50, 60, something like that. Right? And this one obviously is pretty high.
Alright, so actually, okay, high fold versus delay is already 45 plus. And low fold versus delay could be 35 plus. So standard could be around 40%, let's say. And let me check what GTO is folding versus delays. Fold versus delay, 50 overall, 46 overall. So 46 in min-raise pots, and at deep stacks around 40%. In limped pots, fold versus delay is around 50, 55 in at deep stacks, or around 50, yeah. around 50. So we could say 50 is around standard. Anything about above 55 is pretty high, and anything less than like 40 is pretty low, basically. So this guy is extremely exploitable on the turn, as well as the flop in limp pots. And basically he's way overfolding, he's not probing in enough, and definitely we can just take advantage of that by like delaying a ton if we have, or like probing, and like overfolding to probes as well if you have a ace high, weak pairs, etc. Okay, that's good. I think we mostly covered this guy. Now let's talk about. Oh,
About
Shouldn't we check as well like the river act of him, like how he's reacting to different sizings, how he's like, you know.
yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
Uh-huh.
But before we move on to that, is there anything else in the overall HUD that you want to look at?
Yeah, I was also watching his stats in the isopod.
Yeah.
Because he's betting a lot here.
Yeah, but it's kind of normal to see bet a lot because they're supposed to have a strong range.
Yeah,
Like, there's nothing you can do against this 83% C bet because his ISO is so low.
yeah, it makes sense.
So, because he's got such a strong range, it's expected. So I wouldn't like attack him in c-bet pots just because of his 83% c-bet. Basically, I'd just play super straightforward. Yeah, so not much to comment much on ISO pots because generally ISO pots are often determined by their preflop ranges, to be honest. Alright, let's talk about something very important that most people do not use enough, and this is the bet sizings. Most people just never use this pop-up, and it's one of the most useful, valuable pop-ups that we can have, basically. We can see the sizings. They get slightly bigger on each street, which is good. That's generally how it's supposed to be. On the flop, yeah, everything looks quite okay actually here. Like his sizings look okay. Maybe if we open the pop-up, we see something different. His c-bet size is again generally smaller. Probably his float size is generally a bit too big on the flop. Yeah, nothing here that looks too bad, to be honest, regarding his sizings. So, like, it's just important, like, some people might have very obvious tells, like, you might sometimes see someone who's got, like, a pot size bet average. You, like, obviously want to be careful against that. Like, if you're gonna call against, for example, a fish who's 3xing, and the average c-bet size is pot size bets, like, a lot of times you can call against a 3x a lot if they have a normal or small c-bet size, because then you can call a lot with mid pairs, weak pairs, but if they just pot it, you can't do anything with those hands. Like, you can't, if you decide to call with like 6-4 suited and you flop like king 6-2 and he just pots it, you can't really do anything against that, basically, and it's really stupid. So you might even be best folding hands like 6-4 suited if they 3x against those type of players. So it's important to look at this pop-up even pre-flop sometimes. And they can also, actually the tells mostly come from this pop-up. So here we go. This is one of the most important pop-ups which people never use. And do you guys use this? Do you know how it works? Somebody?
No, I'm not using it. Only the bet sizing.
I know. Like this site is kind of how often he is kind of bluffing. If it's like like close to 100, then it's like more often bluffing. And here is like how he reacting, like how with what sizing he's like winning, with what sizing he's calling, and like winning, losing,
At
like
showdown, yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. So WSD means one at showdown after the river action, basically. So it's always on the river action. And over here we see if he's in position. He hasn't bet a small size yet. But if he's betting big, and there's a showdown, he tends to win. So it looks like basically so far he's not bluffing. So you want to be very careful against his river bets. And you can even see it also just on the stats in general, because actually he's barreling a lot on the turn, but he gives up a lot on the river. He's probably barreling a lot with his draws on the turn, but giving up a lot of them if he misses on the river. And probably only triple barreling the top of his value range, and he's not triple barreling thin value as often as he should be. Probably that's what we can tell already just from looking at this low river barrel and these statistics. So if he's betting medium to big sizing, we want to be very, very careful. And he's not even using a small one, so we don't even need to worry about it. And we can see he, like, either when he calls, either he's like calling too much, or you're not bluffing enough. One of the two, basically. So let's see. You're probably not bluffing enough, because your barrel on the river here is one out of three. We don't have much other info to find out, but probably you could try bluffing a bit more, probing a bit more on rivers, or and it's also not just about probe, by the way. Like, it could also be check raise the turn and barrel, or check raise flop and triple barrel, or double barrel, whatever. So it could be different as well. And let's look at in position. So what does it mean if somebody, what do these mean? Like bet T, what does it mean?
Like in position when he bet the turn, when he was like, for example, probing or he was like barreling on the turn. Just betting.
Yeah. If you're in position, you can't probe though. So,
yeah,
for example, an action could be, for example, it could be like bet, right? Or it could be, exactly, yeah. It could be check, bet as well. Or it could be maybe in an ISO pot where he limp calls. It could be float and bet, right? Do you understand that?
Nope.
Yes.
Can you please repeat it?
Okay, maybe we should open up like some kind of Word document or Notepad or something, like, and make it a small screen, like next to the thing, so I can write at the same time. Yeah. All right. So basically, the bet turn. It could be bet in min raise or limp pots, or check bet, or it could be float and barrel, right? Sorry, float and barrel. Or it could be delay float and barrel, right? In ISO pots. And what would you say would be baseline stats for these numbers, actually? Like, what would be baseline? Like, this is how often he's turning a hand into a bluff on the river. So what does it mean if he's turning a hand on the bluff on the river? It counts as, what do you think the worst card to bluff with is for this statistic to count? Do you know? It's bottom pair. So basically bottom pair and worse. So bottom pair, ace high, king high, 9 high, jack high. Anything worse than bottom pair will be counted as a bluff on these. That make sense?
It's even written there,
Yes.
bottom pair or lower.
Okay, good. Yeah. But what would you say is a baseline statistic? Like over here we see it's 0, 20, and 0. What would you say is baseline? Like what would you say is more balanced or GTO or baseline stat?
30, 40, something like that.
Sorry?
30 or 40.
Yeah, we can say we can be 33% as average for pot size bet sizing. Because of math, right? And basically, this guy we see he has 0, we don't know the sample, he has 29. Okay, we can find out the sample. 0 out of 5. And here, call 0 out of 3. Alright. So overall, it looks like he's not bluffing enough. What does the check turn mean? What lines can he take with check turn?
Bet, check, bet.
Yeah, bet, check, bet, good. Or
Delay.
Delay, yeah. Delay,
check,
delay.
check, bet, exactly. And like maybe float,
Yeah, delay, float,
check,
and bet, right?
bet or something in ISO pots, like something weird like that. Or again, delay, double delay float in ISO pots. Yep. And call on the turn. What could this be? Call turn.
So like when he just okay in position, so
Mm-hmm.
he called a probe, right, and turned
Yeah.
his hand into a bluff after the check of the
Well, he called
player,
our probes,
I
right?
know.
Yeah, it could be like call versus probe. And it could also be bet call versus
Yeah.
check raise, right? And
In isopod, call turn and maybe action on the river.
exactly, like call versus delay. Or call versus ISO cbet. And call versus barrel as well. Or also it could be like call versus donk as well. Okay. So these are the possible actions within position. What he could be taking basically. So as you see, it's a pretty useful pop-up if you learn how to use it. And we see that basically everywhere. Like especially he's not triple barreling or betting the turn and then barreling on the river enough with air. So either his barreling range is super strong or he just gives up his air when he doesn't have it. Regarding the check turn, this is the line where he's bluffing the most, and maybe we could confirm that by clicking on a pop-up or something. Like we don't have a bet check bet really. He's only done it a bit. But like as you see, he bet check bets sometimes, and this looks like it might be the weakest of his lines. He's not even delaying much. So bet check bet looks like it might be the weakest line, even though it's like not super high, but still, it's only 29%, so it's still overall not that high. So still, actually, it's probably still more strong than not, to be honest. So basically, what this means is you should be mega super careful against this guy on the river. So you should fold every single hand that is not top pair. And to be honest, you can even fold top pair weak kicker on the river against him. Like as a standard, we should, if we decide to call top pair weak kicker on the flop against most people, we should call 3 times. But against this guy, we should be folding top pair weak kicker against him on the river, right? Because it's just way too strong here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hope that made sense. And now we can look at out of position. You're also never barreling. That's funny. Okay. So again, less than 40%. These are the sizings. When he goes to showdown, when he's calling, this is how often he's win or losing. And probably your sample, like you're not. Okay, so basically, it looks like he's actually calling more when you bet small with weak hands, middle pair or worse maybe. And like either you're not barreling enough on rivers or well it looks like it depends on the bet size actually. But like oh no, sorry, I'm looking at the call. Okay. Let's look at the call first. So when you bet big and he calls, so far he's won 3 out of 4 times. But you basically haven't been barreling much, so I don't know how relevant it is. I don't know how much you're check raising and barreling either. So it's probably not so important, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe these stats aren't just against me. Maybe are his overall stats against other players too. Maybe in three-way too.
I don't know about that. Does anyone know if this is everybody or just heads up?
Yeah, because it doesn't really make much sense because I haven't barreled a lot and I have like here 1 out of 6 and 3 out of 4, and it seems that I don't know maybe.
Yeah, but you might also be check raising, for example.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Or you might be delay, or you might be probing and barreling, or you might be check calling and then probing on the river. So it's taking everything into factor. So I'm not sure, but I think this is just for heads up, if I'm correct. But I'm not sure. Maybe I should ask the coach or somebody that. All right, let's see. Like, definitely though, it looks like you can bet small for value more, like thin value. You should definitely do that more against him because you've won quite a bit against him. So if you want him to call and you think you can get value with mid pairs or just top pair on a very drawy run out, you can bet small, and he's probably not going to raise. He's probably just going to call, and that's good. You can, and I think you just haven't like put him under pressure enough probably regarding the big sizings, because or it could just be that he's folding so much already on flops and turns that by the time he gets to the river he's like you folded him out of everything already, so he's gonna call a ton on the river. It could be that also. So yeah, this is a bit more complicated to analyze, but definitely the in position one is very useful here. It's and the out of position is slightly harder to analyze, but it looks like he's not even bluffing. Okay, yeah, it looks like basically he's not bluffing much, but he might call sometimes. Hard to say, but definitely he's not bluffing enough. And out of position, again, this could be, give me some examples. Let's not write it down, but let's just quickly go through it. Like bet turn, out of position. What could it be?
Probe.
From
Yeah, probe turn. What else?
Bet after check raise.
Good. Bet after check raise and bet the turn. Yeah.
And delay in isopod.
Delay in isopot. Yeah. It could also be iso and bet bet bet. It could also be donk turn. And yeah, I think that's most of it. And again, It's a pretty low number, so probably he's not bluffing enough again. So we see basically on rivers he's very honest from everywhere. But again, it's a clear tendency that when the turn checks through, this is the spot where he might be most inclined to be betting as a bluff. So here it's the highest but not the biggest sample, so it's probably again more normalish, not super weak still. So it's still not something I could necessarily exploit. And what could it be when he checks the turn out of position?
Also bet check bet, I think we count here, right?
It could be like
Delay.
call versus a c bet, and then delay probe.
Probe river.
What else? It could be like double delay, like check bet, right? Like
Yep.
the flop and turn check through, and then he delays. It could be like check raise, check turn, and then bet check bet in that way, kind of. In an ISO pot, it could be like, yeah, that could be bet check bet in an ISO pot. It could be like double delay in ISO pots. So it's important to understand how these things work, basically. And I hope you're starting to understand this now. It's once you get it, it's rather simple to understand. And finally, call turn. What does that mean for out of position? He's never bluffed again.
Call on barrel.
Exactly. Call against the barrel. So it probably means he's not donking. So generally here, if they call on the turn, it means they're going to be donking on the river usually, since they're out of position. So yeah, call against barrels, calls against delays. It could also be like in ISO pots he checks and then we probe, or would that be it? I don't know. No, wait. He checks and then we delay
Call
and then he
or-
check calls on the turn. Yeah, that could
Yeah.
be it. Any other examples? If we donk on the turn, it might be if we donk on the turn, right?
Yeah.
And he calls. Yeah. So those are a few other examples of how of the actions. So it's important to know what actions, and it shows you how. And here we see a clear tendency that overall he's basically not bluffing on rivers enough. And if he is ever bluffing, it's going to be when the turn seems to check through. So that's the only time you should be calling very light. Otherwise, you should be folding even hands you'd call as a standard against the population, such as we said, top pair, weak kickers, and like when he bets, basically. So that's pretty important to know. And yeah, this is a pretty important pop-up. I hope you guys understand it better now. Do you feel
Yeah.
like you understand it better now?
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, great. So I think we've gone through all the statistics, and hopefully you know how to use the HUD rather well now. You understand what's high and low for all the numbers. And what I'd encourage you to do, actually, the next time you open up a session, today or tomorrow, is play one less table or something and actually just open this pop-up. Like as soon as you get heads up, just open this pop-up, especially if you're playing against a reg, and just try to analyze, like, what do these statistics mean? What is his betting range? Is he bluffing a lot, or is he checking a lot? Can I bluff him a lot? Is he calling too much, too little? And just try to analyze this particular pop-up, because as we saw, it can be kind of complicated, but it's super useful, and it's one of the pop-ups that most smart spinners are not using enough. And so I'd encourage you for the next few sessions just to try and learn how to use this pop-up well. It's going to serve you well. Alright, I think that's going to be about it.
Okay. Yeah,
Any-
okay, very interesting.
Yeah. And what about this This pop-up I see I'm using sometime. It's about last hand versus opponent.
Which pop-up? Can you click?
What?
Yeah,
Okay, alright. So you mean the most recent hands from the
yeah,
last... Yeah, that's also useful. Like, definitely you can see if the tendencies are changing recently. It's good because, like, you can see, for example, you could just use the sample for entire database if you want, and then you can just click on this for the last 50 hands, and you see if anything's changing. And for example, here at 16 plus, he's min raising a bit more, but it's a small sample, and he's limp folding 100%, but it's only 2 out of 2. So like, but sometimes we can see some very distinct changes. Like sometimes we can see somebody was, for example, min raising 60%, and now all of a sudden he's only min raising 30%. Like that can, and that's a very big change, and it's important to take note of that. So this pop-up can be useful. Same here. Like sometimes you can see someone at the start of the heads up, maybe he was 3-betting 50% or something crazy, but recently he's calmed down a lot, and you think he's crazy, so you decide to min raise, intending to call way lighter. Maybe you intend to like min raise call with like Jack 9 suited or something. But if you look at this pop up, it's going to be like more like 10% 3-bet. So then you know you need to be more careful. So yeah, this pop up can also be useful in that way for sure. Good to point it out. Any other questions?
No, it was pretty clear, man.
All right, great. Well, let's end the coaching then.